So we started playing Arc Raiders and you got this little icon staring at you asking you to make a decision on where to put your skill points. There's a lot to consider, but you don't want to put a bunch of points in a place where you'll regret it, and you don't really want to spend however much time you think you'll need to plan out the whole build. So I made this quick video to help give you some guidance on the situation. Let's get rolling. Okay, what I'm going to do now is just flow. The skill tree isn't that complicated, but I wanted to showcase some skills that really ought to get your attention. Some obvious and some not so obvious. There are a lot of unknowns with regards to the exact value some of these nodes give you. For example, when something says it will give you more or less of something, it doesn't give you an exact percentage or value. With that being said, I can't say this or that build is the best build ever because, well, no one can. With that in mind, let's get rolling. But before we get started, I just need to say thank you to my channel supporters. These absolute legends help make this kind of content possible. And a special shout out goes to my Florida Man Alligator tiered supporters, the Tranimal and Spectre. All of your support is truly appreciated. The first thing to consider is that I play with a duo or a group pretty regularly. This matters a lot because if you're picking nodes that are reliant on stealth, it won't matter if you're making no noise while your teammates are making a bunch, you know? So consider not just your play style, but how you be playing most of the time. I want to start off by saying speed is king. Typically when people hear that, they think of stamina. That's not always the case. For starting off, it is stamina, so the very first thing you should do is by putting points into your mobility tree. In my mind, there is no single best use of your first 11 points than this right here. The reason being is that it doesn't matter what your playstyle is, whether you're playing with solos or duos, your ability to be able to be mobile is extremely important. And this represents the best return on investment for these points you have early on. You can come back to this later on, but in my opinion, early on is where you're going to find the most benefit from this. Another really strong node that you should be looking for is right here, in-round crafting. There are very few nodes that change full mechanics in the game. Granting you the ability to craft in-game is pretty huge. Some people have higher value for it than I do, but I believe that early on, this makes it really easy to sustain yourself by making bandages and shield recharges on the go. But like I said earlier, speed is king. And that doesn't always come in the form of stamina. For example, looter's instincts. When searching container, loot is revealed faster. You may be thinking, I want a PvP, I want to worry about other players. I'm not really worried about looting. Me personally, I like to secure an area first before I start looting it, so I really don't need the speed all that much. However, this does reduce the time it takes for you to actually loot whatever it is that you're looting, leaving you in a vulnerable state for a smaller window of time. So this is not necessarily a bad choice to be putting a lot of points into. Same thing for making less noise when looting. Again, if you're a PvP oriented player, I want you to consider if you just finished the fight and you're trying to loot your kills, what's best for you at that point in time? More stamina or having the ability to clean sweep that body as fast as possible and get you out of that vulnerable position. Just something to consider. On the conditioning side of things, there are a few good nodes. Used to the weight, obviously you have to pick one point into it to get further into the tree. However, this really doesn't need to be put points into until you get to the point where you're running heavy shields on a regular basis. So you can always come back to that. And I really want to emphasize this point here now that I've put points into all three trees. You don't have to go down one tree entirely. You can mix and match to make great synergies, starting off with this one. So we can move our way up to here to proficient prior. Breaching doors and containers takes less time. Now, I've personally put points into this. I can tell you, I'm going to show on the screen that it goes from breaching a door for 10 seconds to 7 seconds. Breaching containers gets significantly faster. It is noticeable, but for me, I doubt that maybe 5 points is worth it. That could be different for you though. But if we take a step back, look at some synergies that we can do here, I really want to get carry the momentum and I want to get calming stroll. So in order to do that, I need to get points into here. This is what we call a toll cost. So I'm going to put points into nodes that I normally wouldn't be putting points into. Not that these are necessarily bad. We'll come back to that in a second. Is that I have to put points in here in order to get this one. This is my goal. So in order to get here, I need to put 2 more points. And at this point, your preferences out of these 3, I like to have volt speed. So I'm going to go ahead and put points into there to get these 2 main nodes. If you just stop right here, you have so many more points left over to go to other branches. And you've got so much value out of this branch already. Couple of things to highlight here that you may not be paying attention to, right? So this right here, unburdened roll, if your shield breaks, your first dodge roll within a few seconds does not cost stamina, synergizes really well with carry the momentum. And so if your shield breaks and you're dodging, which is typically the case, that dodge roll is free, and then the sprinting afterwards is also free. Couple of key notes to consider. In my opinion, conditioning is the weakest branch because it doesn't have a lot of nodes that really change the game for you significantly. However, here are a couple of noteworthy exceptions. Use to the weight is a fairly easy node to get to, so it's not really hard to put 5 points into this no matter where you go. Fight or flight, that's okay. However, it is a bit niche in its conditions, which brings me to a point that I want to bring up. Niche conditions, you will always find a situation in which you can explain how a node can be extremely beneficial. However, the question you have to ask is how often does that situation come up for you and how much you value what that node is bringing to the table in that situation, which is why I started off by saying the stamina is the first thing you should do, because this is a blanket stat increase that's going to help you in regardless of what you're doing. So for conditioning, in order to get to unburden roll, I think you're going to get the highest value from use to the weight. And then from here, it comes down to what you really want to prioritize. You can easily do this and you get unburden roll. Unburden roll, again, synergizes with carry the momentum. But then the key thing here is to point out most of these, in my opinion, are absolute doo-doo. They're not worth putting points into. They're certainly not worth the points you have to get to in order to get there. However, one thing to put into perspective is loaded arms, which is pretty huge because typically speaking, the heaviest things you're carrying are weapons and armor. Having a full weapon not count towards your encumbrance is pretty significant. And now I'm going to dive in a little bit more into the survival trio. But before we get into that, if you've made it this far, you should give this video a like. And I'd like to ask you to consider hitting that subscribe and notification button as well. Thank you so much for your consideration. And now back to the video. I've heard mixed feelings about revitalizing squat. Everyone who has gotten points into this said they felt unsatisfied with the points they put into this. I don't know for sure personally. If you've put points into this, let me know down in the comments what you think about it. Looter's instincts, make less noise when looting, think is obviously decent. I think I'd rather just go faster when I crouch than the stamina, because it's not that I don't want the stamina over the speed. It's just that, again, I don't think I'm getting a lot of value, and I've already put points into mobility anyways. Then from here, it depends on which you're going to get both of these, because there are some really good nodes in here that you really need to get to. For example, Suffer in Silence is an interesting one, because if you've ever been in a gunfight where you've pushed somebody after you put a lot of damage into them and you just cannot find them at all, chances are this is probably one of the nodes they're using. So kind of consider that. But late into the branch, Survival has a lot of really great nodes. Starting off with Broad Shoulders, this can effectively turn one of your combat or tactical augments into a looting augment. It's just a significant amount of extra weight that you get to carry. Pretty big. Traveling Tinkerer unlocks additional items to field craft. This is like the second stage of the in-round crafting. You get a lot more items to craft, and it's mostly around traps. These traps are extremely useful. They're not hard to craft. However, they're not additional healing items. So you're going to get all of the healing items you wanted out of in-round crafting from the original in-round crafting node. Looter's Luck, it may seem like on face value it's not all that great. It looks like a souped up version of Looter's Instincts. However, if you combine Looter's Instincts with Looter's Luck, your ability to strip a body clean really fast jumps up by a lot. So that's something to consider. Then you have Stubborn Mule. Your stamina regeneration is less affected by being over encumbered. If you've ever had those raids where you're just so fat full of loot that you physically can't even recover your stamina anymore, this is going to come to mind. However, I do feel like this node is kind of a win harder node, because if you get into those situations on a regular basis, you're probably doing really well anyways. This is going to find value for you, maybe not for most other people though. 3 deep breaths. A lot of times when you're dodge rolling, because like most people, when you think of ability that drains your stamina, you're usually thinking about dodge rolling. After dodge rolling, you're typically going to be sprinting, which is why you're going to get a lot more value out of something like carry the momentum than you will with 3 deep breaths. It's not unuseful, but consider the fact that you cannot regenerate stamina while you're using it. So after an ability drains your stamina, you're probably going to be using more stamina, and then you're probably not going to have the benefit of this node. Ultimately though, the end game for this branch is definitely going to be security breach. I'm sure you've gotten into many rooms that have lockers that says require security breach. This is the node that you need to have in order to get those lockers open. So what path you use to get there is really up to you in terms of how much points you want to put into this tree. It's really going to come down to what your preferences are. I don't see anything wrong with putting lots of points here. Before ending the video, I wanted to go ahead and touch on a couple of things. You can think of specific scenarios in which certain nodes will get the highest value. A great example would be crawl before you walk. You can think of all those times you got down by the evac, and if you just had a little bit more speed, you might have survived. These are niche situations that I'm sure you can think of for a lot of these nodes that are going to be gaining value. But the key thing you want to think about, especially early on, is what's going to be the most consistent use of your points that you're going to get value from every single raid in the majority of the situations you're going to need them in. And, well, there's really no better start, in my opinion, than this. From here, you can go to a lot of places. Now, it just depends on where you want to go. I highly recommend still putting a little further, because these two are extremely high value. And those are probably the biggest considerations you are worried about before really diving in and trying to plan out a huge build. If you made it this far, leave a like, consider subscribing, and if you're interested in a more general or even PvP guide, check these videos out. Ways to support the channel and Discord links down below. Thank you so much for watching till the end, and as always, good hunting.